How does a person answer why something happens?
When you look at the findings in different fields,
Scant is the part of life in which we live.
To attain the highest values.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to How Did You Learn That? A show where we hear from experts who have spent years intentionally pursuing mastery in a skill. We unpack how they learned it, and we uncover a lesson that you can apply at home. I'm your host, Andrew Barry, and joining me today is Nate Kadlac, a digital product designer based in Los Angeles. Nate's currently leading product design for Homespotter, a growth tool for real estate agents. Before that, he co-founded the first mobile public transit app for Minnesota Metro Transit without permission. He designed the first news app for Minnesota Public Radio, as well as the first mobile checkouts experience for Best Buy. Nate got into design in quite a crazy way, so I'm excited to unpack that and at some point get to the topic that gets me really excited every time we talk, which is typeface. Nate, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm just thrilled to be here, Andrew.
Very cool, man. So you and I have spent a lot of time talking about typeface, but also design in general. And I think it's a good starting point to start with design in general. I think that's how you identify in your core as a designer. And I think what would be interesting to know is how would you describe the nature of that ability that you've developed?
Yeah, that's a great question. Design to me is it's something that feels instinctual. Like it's something that I've always had this like little part of me that's been around design and around creativity growing up. I think growing up in a household where my dad is one of the most talented people I know. He's an old school artist, culinary, could frost a wedding cake. You know, we did Ukrainian Easter eggs as kids. And I think just that instilled in me the sense of looking at the world through things that you can make and apply in different ways. And so I've just, whether it's photography, drawing, web design, it's just been, instinctual to me.
That's really interesting. And you've connected that right away to a childhood memory, which, is often where these kind of things start. So, what did that look like? Like paint us a picture of that experience growing up, the influence your dad had. What sort of like early training were you doing in design?
Yeah, my dad influenced me in a way by doing art like in the same room as me. So he would be sculpting or oil painting in the same room. And he never was really like necessarily a great teacher, but he taught me through action. And I started drawing comic books like a lot of young artists. And I would draw them out on like large map boards. And, ever since going to school as a kid, I think I've always embodied or embraced like art class and just embraced that creativity. There's times where I'd watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and a buddy and I, who is also a great artist, would pause the television on a still frame and we would just sit there and before it like, automatically unpause, like we would just try to draw the entire scene. Yeah. And so it's just a way of like copying, and getting a sense for how could we just draw the things we want to draw in different environments in different unique ways.
Yeah, so many artists talk about that, about like copying other great artists as a form of practice, right? So you're going to be a father soon. I recently became a father. What are some of the things your dad taught you that you will do for your future child that you think are important as well? That how did he encourage that exploration from you? How did he support it as well?
I think just there's a sense of just knowing what you love and knowing that, and these are things I'm still learning right now, but the idea that you're always instilling the decisions that you make, whether you want to or not, and they're absorbing that. And so to me, it's about character and like, how do I live my life in a way that represents the things that I love and the things that I want to instill in my child? And I think just being in the same room, participating, drawing, looking at movies in a different way and maybe kind of reflecting on what we're watching, just instead of absorbing content and taking all these inputs, what can we do with that? And I want to make
Mm.
sure that what I teach my child is that we can make something from this
Mm.
creativity. There's
Mm.
something interesting here. Let's do something with it.
Mm. I love that. Um, one of the things I always challenge, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time here because I think this is actually really interesting, is like, and I'm not at the stage yet. My son's only 8 months, or not even, and so it's going to happen at some point. But how did your dad, like, he didn't get you into sculpting, for example, like some specific type of art form. He clearly let you kind of explore and find different interests, and
Mhm.
then assume like he supported you behind those. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that, like letting the child kind of like find their niche?
Yeah, I was privileged enough to see a lot of different explorations. Uh, like I said, the Ukrainian Easter eggs, like
Mm,
everything he did with such excellence. And I always had this high bar for whatever I pursued. And while I didn't go into sculpting, and I think if the internet hadn't happened, I might have been a fine artist. And,
mm,
I decided to kind of like explore that instead. Um, but I think being able to try a lot of things. I was also in sports, played baseball, basketball,
mm,
and it was sports and art for me. It was just
mm,
one of the two essentially. And, they let me explore that too. And I wasn't going to play professionally, but I think it allowed my brain to kind of just embrace multiple things. And they never really said no.
mm,
There were certain things like musical instruments that maybe we couldn't afford, and
mm.
I was sort of pushed to try other things. We had a piano growing up, and so I was playing piano a little bit,
Yeah.
and just feeling things out. And I think that's
Mm,
what was important about what my dad taught me, was just to not not just get stuck on one thing, but like he built our house, for instance. And so
mm.
a lot of the things around me were created with his own hands, and so uh, that was just around everywhere.
um, when you started getting into that, so now this is formulating as a topic in your mind. Like, are you more interested at that point in the why behind it, or like the how? Like you getting very practical and like what the skills you needed to build.
The why was certainly important. I just remember thinking, okay, like there's something really interesting here. Like I felt sort of naturally creative. I wasn't sure exactly how to do it yet.
Mm,
And I reached out to a friend who I knew was doing web design, and he needed someone with like a creative eye to kind of like balance out his creative work for his clients. And so I worked as an apprentice. Essentially, I
mm,
ended up quitting school because I was not happy with like the traditional path. It seemed like the professors just didn't realize like this internet, like that web was like this huge gold mine of opportunity. And I wanted to skip ahead.
mm.
I wanted to like chase that as quickly as possible. And I felt like I
Accelerate.
was losing
Yeah.
time. I was having FOMO because I thought I was missing out.
What age was this?
So I was 19, I believe, when
Oh,
I quit college, maybe 18, but right
okay.
in there.
Okay. Awesome. And so you mentioned I want to unpack some of the kind of leaps that you went through,
Mhm.
if we can pinpoint those. But you've touched on a few times now, like you've enlisted this kind of mentor. You've mentioned a couple, I think. Like which of those sort of stand out for you as people that made a big impact on your journey of learning design?
So I had two mentors growing up. One was a photography mentor, and then a sort of a web design mentor.
Hmm.
And the photographer, Marcellus, really enabled me to like see the world not through this path of, hey, you can just be a photographer and go down this path. Like he taught me about how you could apply for assistant roles and positions in photography. Like you could kind of like start your own studio. And he started to help me
Mm,
think a little bit more three-dimensionally about what that meant. And
mm,
even though I didn't go down that path, it started to crystallize for me like, wow, there's like not just one route like I can take.
yeah.
I can think about this differently. And so my other mentor, Jeff, who I worked with for 2 years, and he helped me learn how to code and apply design to the web. Like he put me on client projects right away, and I was just helping him out like with logo design,
Mm,
branding, and then creating like web design templates for him.
mm,
And so that how was like important to me because I needed to know how to do this so I could build a portfolio, start
Yeah.
getting my own clients, right?
Yeah. So that was your end goal, but you were, and how much, I mean, it's just, this is rhetorical, but like there's so much benefit to have someone who can show you the steps, who's like laying it out to you, showing you all the options. It just shortcuts all of that like trial and error that you have to do.
It's like I was learning how to play basketball and I started in 10th grade and I made the varsity team, but I hung around people who were so much better than I was horrible. But like within 2 years, I escalated, quickly enough to like understand how to play and how to like shoot. And this is the same thing. It's like surround yourself with people who are so much better than you if you can.
Yeah. Oh, so I'm going to come back to the leaps of understanding because you're making me think of comfort zone and how you pushed yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit, I think, with these mentors, even the basketball. What role did getting out of your comfort zone play for you?
I'm trying to, I was uncomfortable, not necessarily like learning basketball or learning how to play, or I think what was uncomfortable for me or what I took away from that was how much work I started to realize, like how far behind I was, and seeing them do these things in like an intuitive and natural ability. It wasn't coming natural to me really quickly. And so I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I do believe that I soon realized like, wow, there's a chasm between me and where I want to be. But I could not see a quicker way to get there than by being uncomfortable and asking for help.
Yeah. I think that leads you to that. And it's that, what's the word for it? I think it's conscious incompetence, right? You're like suddenly aware of this journey that you have to go on. And then I think that probably motivated you and motivate many to like reach out to those mentors and those teachers to be like, okay, what do I need to do next?
Right? Absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of that journey, let's go back to that in terms of like pinpointing maybe some of the leaps that you went through where you felt like, okay, I'm getting better at this. Like if you could look back on that, what were those couple of milestones that you went through where you're like, okay, like I understand this now?
The milestones that I think helped me were technical. So the internet was one. So the internet was a way to think about applying design in a different way. And it just allowed me to kind of know that there's like this blank canvas and I can kind of start to do anything I want with it. And I felt comfortable because like, it's like painting, right? Like there's when you have something just like blank and white, and same with writing, the opportunities are endless. And so that was just the first thing that happened was the internet, that I realized like there was something here. Another thing that happened that made me embrace it more was the introduction of CSS, which is cascading style sheets on the web. And it was moving from a table layout to using CSS to control like the layout and type and spacing. And what that did was it brought design closer and more tangible to what traditional design looked and felt like, right? So before you just had like these kind of like tables but traditional graphic design, it's just like beautiful. Like there's like, you have huge letters, the spacing, you could run things vertically and really composite an interesting piece that you couldn't do it on the web like that at first. CSS allowed you to do that. So it just enabled me to think a little bit more deeply about how to merge the two.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. The inspiration that you draw on from others. Do you go back to that original example we talked about of like, did you try and, recreate a lot of artistic work that appealed to you? Did you just, used to absorb it in your free time? Like, how did you consume that inspiration and how did you use it in the work you were doing?
All the time. I can think of like a handful of sites that I would visit over and over and just be amazed at what they were doing. There was Hillman Curtis, who unfortunately passed away, but when Flash was big, like he would bring design and Flash and create these like really great animations and motion graphics. And that was something that I always, storytelling became really important early on. Just like, how can you create a quick animation and tell a story? And so that like things like that appealed to me. Things like like there was a site called Too Advanced that was just futuristic graphics, and I was copying what they were doing just as a way to learn, like how can I deconstruct this design so I know like what it took to build it, and then essentially rebuild it, but just on my own time. It's kind of like that idea of like copying a writer. So
Yeah.
looking at a book and just actually like word for word going through and copying them and just seeing what it feels like to write like that person.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Yeah, and it sounds like you just keep going back to that well, like whenever throughout, right? That's something you'll never stop doing.
Yeah.
In terms
No,
of
I
connecting.
agree.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get tactical a little bit here in terms of like the practice regime. Like as you've started to master this, you've talked about that, the way you consume some of the inspiration. But what did a day look like? A typical day as you're building this skill. You've now connected, like you want to be a designer. Like how do you now put that into motion?
Yeah, I'm laughing because when I was learning design, I was lying to pay rent. Like I would lie to my landlord that, yeah, I sent the check in the mail. I don't know where it is, and I was just scraping by. Right.
Yeah.
I think, what it took for me was, so I was learning design through my mentor, or I'm sorry, learning kind of how to apply it to the web. I was building my portfolio on the side and reaching out to friends. The photography studio that I was assisting for, I started doing the website for them. So they were a digital photo agency, and they were just needing help with their website. So I was learning how to kind of apply my skills there. Every single opportunity I had to understand design and what it meant to be a web designer, I took. So like I was staying up late at night, drinking Mountain Dew, 2 liters, and eating peanut butter jelly sandwiches, and just doing what it took to like learn this stuff. Cause to me, I had quit college at this point. I had chosen a different route. I was doing odd jobs just to like survive, just put food in my belly. And like, I was like all in, and I could not think of another path that I wanted to take. And so I just had to do what it, so for 2 years I was building a portfolio until I got hired full time.
Yeah, and how much of that was like intentional, like I'm working towards this ultimate goal in 2 years' time of building this portfolio, and how much it was just like I'm just like making ends meet. I just need to pay this month's rent.
Again, leaning back on my photography skills, I was shooting weddings during the weekends to make money, and that was good money. But I just realized quickly how horrible dealing with just the whole family and the bride, like you'd be doing these things so far out in advance, and it just the web was so immediate, and it was just like I could design it, publish it, and it's done. There was no like hand holding a client for a year prior to the event,
Yeah.
And so it gave me the money to kind of get by, but I also realized it just honed in like where I want to go by doing all of these other things,
Yeah. And I'm sure this is a challenge many people have, where you get this allure of good money, easier money, quicker money, but like you're not enjoying the work as much, and then this time you spend like building this skill set, which should pay off in a few years' time. Like, how did you fight that balance all the time? Like, any tips you have there?
I think for me it was, just realizing that I didn't know what kind of money I was going to make. I didn't know exactly what that meant to me at the time. I knew that autonomy and freedom, like when you think about what you want, for me, it was the freedom. I wanted freedom to travel, to just find ways to spend my own time outside of work, but I wanted the work to be able to come with me if I could. So for me, it was just, I had this list of, okay, I want to run my own thing, my own company or whatever it is. I don't know what that looks like yet. And at the time it was a little too early to do that. I needed a job to be able to like have a consistent paycheck so that I could be around other people. Cause I was kind of siloing myself off again from the world, just learning this stuff. And I needed to like my short-term goal was to find a job that could put me in front of like a bunch of new designers, keep learning and growing, and then maybe go back out on my own. And so that was my short-term goal. And so to me, to achieve that, I had to get my portfolio done. I had to show that I was competent against people just graduating college, and show that I was worth investing in a sense.
I'm sure, again, there's a lot of people that have gone through just that this year, this thing of like siloing themselves off and learning something and developing a skill that they, kind of at this point where they're now ready to share with the world.
Yeah.
What took you to that next step of actually sharing your work and getting your portfolio out there?
Yeah, I had a number of clients that I was working with at the time, just doing some basic web design stuff. I was in over my head because I was realizing that I was saying yes to everything, but then it kind of like bit me in the ass a little bit when I can write C+ programming languages to connect hardware to your website. Like, I don't know what I was doing, but like,
I can relate to that. Yeah.
And so I was kind of like, the term like, over your skis, and I was feeling like that. And so I kind of had to like pull myself back a little bit and realize that, I need to like learn a few things. I'm at a loss for your question. I don't feel like I fully answered it.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to that.
Okay.
I want to know if there was a point in this journey that you felt like quitting, and if you did, what got you through that?
I never did, because I always feared failing, and that sort of like took care of that feeling of quitting. Like, I wasn't sure if I was going to succeed, but I was fearful of failing, and so quitting was never really an option, at least yet. And I had been, along the way, I've been told like, wow, like your stuff is actually pretty good, and I had people telling me this, so I knew that I was sort of on the right track. And if I didn't have that feedback, and to your point about sharing, like I started meeting people in the design community and looking and comparing and understanding that, wow, I was actually okay. Like it wasn't horrible by any means. And I think there was like a role for me. So it was more about, if I just keep doing what I'm doing, then maybe, just like the numbers game, like if you just are consistent long enough, opportunities will come to you. And that's kind of how I felt about it.
You said something earlier about like the feedback you started getting, people saying, hey, this is quite good. And that, so I want to talk about like what role feedback played, but also at some point, when did you start believing like, okay, I'm actually really good at this? And when did that become motivation to keep getting better and keep doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I remember one particular instance where, so I had been teaching myself design up to this point. I knew like the foundational principles played a big part. And so I was trying to do it the right way. I had a friend who was a traditional graphic designer, went to a well-respected school. She was a great logo and brand designer, knew nothing about the web, right? But she was a true designer in my sense. Like she embodied what I had hoped to be. And when she saw my stuff for the first time, she was like, oh my God, like this is really good. And, it was on the web and it was something that she couldn't do, but just knowing that the design itself was actually like, the typography was well, was well thought through. Things didn't look basic. Like I had intentionality and intrigue in my design. Like that sort of like set me off a little bit further. And as soon as I started hanging out with more designers, I realized that, I wasn't really that far behind, if at all.
That's awesome. I mean, you invested in yourself first, right? Like so that time you took and that effort you put in to create that portfolio, is that evidence of that investment?
It set my career, because I was able to just, take that next job, and then, it just becomes this flywheel effect of like, taking that portfolio, run it into the next job, into the next thing. And so it truly is about that first opportunity and how how much you can take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about a little bit more about the importance of a personal website, because I think that's such a key point. And I highly recommend everyone check out your one. It's Kadlac.com, right?
That's right.
Kadlac.com. I mean, how did you get a domain like your Twitter handle? Like, is this just because you were like quick to the game and you've had these things for a long time?
The combination of having a kind of a unique last name and being quick to the game. Yes,
Yeah.
I think I got my domain in the early 2000s, and I've had other people reach out to me with the last name Kadlac, and they're just dumbfounded that somehow I have it. Like
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Twitter handle as well. Like, it's very neat.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, what other things have you, or benefits have you seen to having that personal website?
It's changed many times over the years. Like, I think I'm on version probably 12 now. But as I've gotten older, I have writing. It's been a place it's like your bedroom, like as a kid, like you have your posters on your walls, and you have all this stuff, just your room is littered with personality. That's how I feel about a website. And I think people maybe take it too seriously in some instances, and they want to treat it very carefully with white gloves. But it's your playground. It's your creative sandbox. And I think it's a way to persist online. You have all the benefits of SEO, and you have the benefits of people like, reaching out and finding you through serendipity. But I do believe that it's a playground for your personality, and you have a greater chance of landing jobs, I believe, because you're putting yourself out there, and you're putting your writing out there, putting your photography or whatever it is, your videos. And instead of just letting a platform sort of own your identity through Instagram or Facebook or everything else, like, this is a place you have control of.
I love that. I've definitely started thinking like this for my own website, and sort of like everything has its place, and I want to showcase my interests and achievements and all this. I like that concept of a bedroom, or the analogy, and like it's like a bedroom you want to invite people into to like showcase who you are, that you can partner with them, work with them, you start relationships. Like, it shows people how you think.
When you were a kid, the first thing you would say is like, you just want to come to my bedroom? Like, it was
Yeah.
a way to show off,
Yeah, totally. That's such a great analogy. So couple last questions here, and then I want to dive into the lesson segment. But what role did your friends and family play? As you've already mentioned the role your dad played, but kind of throughout that journey to where you are now, what role did they play in supporting you?
So I never was supported financially. I never was supported in that way. And so what my parents were able to give me was just support emotionally. And they really never told me what I was doing was wrong. And I'm not sure why. Maybe they didn't fully understand what I was attempting to do. So maybe there was like just some, I don't know. I don't want to like think it was ignorance or anything, but I just think like they were always there to have my back, and they always just were interested in hearing what I was doing. And that was enough for me to sort of feel like there were no obstacles or hurdles in my way, because I think doing this stuff is hard enough, but when you don't have the support of your family, that's just a whole nother layer that really can tear people up inside and prevent them from moving forward. So, so my family was always there. My friends were a little bit outside the bubble in terms of what I was trying to do. So I don't feel like I don't think they had a full comprehension of where I was going, but they just knew I was up to weird stuff. And it was always fun to kind of show them the things I was working on. And in the kind of the same way, it's like, they weren't there to support me in terms of like anything, but, oh, that's really cool. And they like, you're doing weird shit, whether it was making YouTube videos, doing crazy stuff on MySpace. I was always kind of like finding just ways to like output creativity.
Yeah, the one experimenting with all like the new platforms coming out and
exactly,
and all that. A lot of the things you said there resonated with me. And especially, I want to go back to that first one you said about ignorance. And I've thought about this a lot as well. I think it's easy to confuse when you're thinking about your parents, ignorance and unconditional love. And I think as you become a parent, you start to like appreciate the nuance there. And I think it's so easy to be like, oh, they just didn't understand, and they were ignorant of it. But like maybe it was just they like supported you no matter what.
I think you're spot on. I think that's such a, I take back anything I had hinted at around ignorance.
Yeah, but it's so easy to tend to go there.
Love.
Yeah. That's such a cool point. So what's next? What sort of new paths do you want to forge in this world that you're in now?
I think what I've been thinking about a lot lately is just, I've always designed with the bar being set by other designers. And so I've always looked through this design lens as, what do other designers think about that? Or why would they care? And the trap that I think I've fallen into is to care about what other designers think, because they're not really my true audience. They're just what I've held myself to, this bar. So I think that there's a point where you need to understand who your true audience is. And it's not designers for me. It's maybe non-designers. It's other people who don't fully understand like the world of design, but the importance it plays in our lives. And that's what's been really interesting to me lately, is just how the things that I'm talking about can resonate with non-designers because it's still important. We use designed objects, iPhones, water bottles, like these things are designed. Yeah. And I think it's such a great lesson for myself to understand that there's things that I can teach other people who don't know the craft or the understanding of that. So that's where my head's been lately.
I love it. And you gave me a lot of good of the ideas that this podcast is hopefully becoming. This is why I'm so fascinated in this, because I think everyone has some kind of expertise that they can share with the world, and you just see you making that connection with people. You're obviously getting that feedback is amazing. One of the things that you've said, and I love this, I think you tweeted this, was you have a favorite color, you should have a favorite typeface. And so I want to get into that now. And that just struck me because like I have a website, and I don't know the first thing about typeface, about layouts, about font. And you and I started talking about it, and it's like this crazy cool rabbit hole that you can go down on how people create fonts, and how they come into being in the world, and what different fonts mean. And so I want to break down that a little bit with you. And so maybe as a starting point, what goes into making fonts, and let's share maybe a couple of cool stories of like the creation of some fonts that people can look up.
Yeah. So the creation of fonts is something that it takes a lot of work. And I have huge respect for type designers who do this, because it's it's an insane job, to be honest. And I don't even know that it's actually that important to know how fonts are made. But to answer your question, which I do think that what's good to understand is that type has a long history, and it's been around. I think the first printing press was created in the 15th century, and the Gutenberg press. And I think to know that type is a visual form of communication that we all connect to. And so there's, whether you know it or not, history is built up into type. So you have, some of the first typesetted fonts or typography was black letter fonts, which were styled after like the Gothic characters. And then those were very kind of unreadable. And so humanist typefaces started to come out, which were a little bit more like realistic looking to the handwritten letter. And then you move through history. So as you move towards where we are now, like there's just a built up like knowledge base around why typefaces make you feel a certain way, that why serif fonts, which have been around forever, have a vibe of just they're traditional. They kind of like, they're a little bit more like dressed up in a way. And these are just, they're built in, whether, you know, so like there's vibes that are, you can create with typefaces that are really interesting because it's innate in essence.
And so this development of fonts has been this riffing on what's already out there. Would that be accurate? It's kind of like people taking it and then giving their own flair to it, and then creating that consistently across an alphabet of upper and lowercase characters.
Yeah. So you take just trying to think of like a traditional sans serif that you start to change. So you went from like serif fonts to sans serif fonts, and people starting to explore as the tools got better, different ways to, you know, stylistically like make fonts more readable. So for instance, newspapers had to deal with like very small type. And so new font or new typefaces had to be created so that they could be readable at small sizes. So then, you know, as like the internet came around, you kind of had to redesign what typefaces look like on screens, because the ones that were great for print had to be scaled down so small, and they could only be on a, you know, a 16-point grid. And it was, so it's like they evolved and then they have to like re-evolve for the medium that it's playing a part of.
Yeah, some like lose a little bit of the flair so that they're more readable. Can you quickly explain for people like the difference between serif and sans serif? Like a super basic question, but
yeah. So a traditional serif just, you know, is like a Times New Roman that's, you know, included with like Microsoft Word. It's essentially you have a letter form with small serifs that kind of like hang off the edges. So if you're imagining a letter T, like a capital letter T, you'll have the top bar that just kind of extends down on the sides, and then the little serifs on the bottom of the T extend out. And it's a very traditional and readable typeface typically, depending on which one you choose. But there's that. And then the sans serif fonts are very simple geometric shapes that are they just exclude those serifs. So it's a typically a, you know, a more modern or clean font.
So how would someone go about, so the appeal of like customizing a font for my website is huge. I totally see the value in doing that. How do you start? How do you start getting yourself sort of familiar with those decisions that need to go into that?
Yeah. So I think that, you know, there's a couple of foundational principles to understand about typography. First is like the legibility of a font. And the way to break this down is there's a really great designer, Jason Santamaria, who kind of talks about this a little bit. And he mentions that there's, you know, you have like display header copy, which is, let's imagine just like, we'll blow up the extremes here, but imagine a billboard, and the font needs, or the typeface needs to be like really big, needs to be set incredibly large. You can see the details. So you might be able to pick a font, like pick a typeface that actually has really like unique characteristics in it. And so those are great for big sizes. But when you have to go small and think about the body text that you read on a website, you might need to find something that can work at smaller sizes, and it doesn't have as many flourishes in it. And so there's essentially two styles of fonts. There's the display font and then the body font. And just know that, you know, display fonts are designed a little differently because they're meant to be scaled up, and then type font or body font is also designed a little differently. And then, you know, thinking about the vibe or emotion that you want to give off. And, you know, we've been talking a lot about lately between you and I, just core values. And I think what's really important is understanding what makes you, you, and starting to look at typefaces in the same way. So, so the thing I always come back to is the web is made up of like 95% type, right? It's everywhere. It's in emails. Even if you go to a YouTube page, the video takes up a certain portion of it, but then you have like, you might have comments, you have everything else. And so it's a way of like balancing everything. So type is complex. There's just a lot of it to work with. And so think about what your values are. Are you a little bit more conservative, not politically speaking, but just like,
Yeah.
what do you wear? What do you like in style? What do you like to eat? Like, what kind of music do you like? And I think you can start to boil these core values down into who you are. And then you take these sort of adjectives of what those are, and you start to look for fonts or type that is embodies some of these characteristics. It could be movies. It could be the movies that you watch. Like maybe
Oh,
there's,
yeah.
if you look at like the intro title
Yeah.
sequence,
Yeah.
you know, I think some of the most popular ones are like the Alfred Hitchcock ones where Saul Bass did the intros to. There's Seven, kind of an older movie with like Brad Pitt, and
Yeah.
you know, just the title graphics that they
Yeah.
used created an initial energy or vibe that
Yeah.
led you into the movie.
Yeah.
And I think understanding that that's an important part to typefaces is kind of where you start.
Yeah, like Tarantino's films, I've always thought like the way he draws that in, right? He's a very good example there. So two questions came to mind. Can you mix and match fonts a little bit, like say between the, you know, the header and the body, like on one website?
You can mix and match them only in like the use cases that they're designed for. So
Yeah.
let's say all your headers are one typeface, but that's great, and all of your body text is another.
Yeah.
That's okay. You probably don't want to use a display face for your body text.
Yeah.
Because it's, once you get those large letter forms down into like a 12 pixel font, like it's going to be so crunched, and you actually lose the readability of it.
Yeah.
But you can mix and match, and it's a very common way. I don't think you always need to, because when you choose a typeface that you enjoy, a lot of them come with different styles that are meant to work together. So that's what's called a family. And so you have, like, let's say Helvetica is a family of styles, because it has bold, regular, light, oblique variations of that. And so you can use those interchangeably because the designer meant for those to be used together.
That makes sense.
So in that case, if you wanted to use Helvetica bold for the or Helvetica heavy for like the display font, you could use Helvetica regular or Roman for the body text, and flip them around if you wanted to.
Yeah. And so if someone was to go and look at different fonts, and actually, do you have a great, like a good website to go to? Would you suggest any? I think you sent me something recently about, where would you recommend people go?
So there's a couple of places. I think that one is Typographica.com is one. They really kind of dive into the details of typography. They kind of go through the history. They even rank like kind of like the you know, the color of the year, which is usually a Pantone color. Like Typographic has the font of the year, the typeface of the year.
Cool.
You know, and I know I actually get this mixed up a lot, and just to kind of like explain typeface and font, like there's a great way to kind of think about it, and I sometimes mix them up myself, so I'm trying to, you know, it's fine. But you know, there's a type. So I have this quote. It's by Nick Sherman. So a typeface is to a font as a song is to an MP3. So the font is the MP3 file. It's that individual like digital file. But like, so for instance, Helvetica is the typeface, and then Helvetica.ttf, which is like the true type font. That's the font.
Yeah.
So I mix those up a lot too, but that's kind of why you might hear that a lot.
Yeah, no, that's a good distinction. And it's the typeface that makes you feel those certain emotions or core values that you were talking about earlier.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you're looking at this, is this a case of like, you know, you're looking at the letters like lined up, and you kind of just paying attention to how a T makes you feel, kind of thing? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah. So it's one way to look at like the details of a certain letter form. And I think that's great. You could look at whimsical letters like a Q. You could look at a W. You could look at some of those just to kind of like look at them really closely, kind of zoom in on them and see if there's anything that appeals to you. So that's one way. Another way to think about it is, you know, the whole is greater than its parts, right? And so you might go to a website, and I'm trying to think of a good website. So like the greatdiscontent.com is actually a really great website because they use big, large letter forms. As soon as you go there, you get this just feeling of like, it's kind of cool. And, they're really modern aesthetic, and it's easy to read. The body font is really large. So all these things kind of come into play, but that's what you're after is a typeface that really says something to you. And not all typefaces will. But if you open like up that Google list of fonts in Squarespace or WordPress or wherever you're hosting your site, there's 100 of them. And I think it's hard to discern between what those are in a long list. But if you actually go to the Foundry, like if you go to google.com/fonts, or if you go to some of these other foundries we can put in the show notes, you can kind of start to see what the designer's intent was. Where were they when they designed the font? Are they drawing in characteristics of the region? Are they trying to embody sort of like, was the intent for this to be a book, like a book typeface, like the cover of a book? Sometimes people just design these things for interesting use cases. And so there's a lot of ways to find this stuff out, but
I think that would be incredibly helpful for people, but I think myself would be included. This maybe don't feel comfortable or confident in being able to look at a font, even look at how it's used in different websites and be like, oh, I like that specific thing. But to know some of that backstory of what the designer was doing, and if it almost like being like, okay, that's the region, that's the vibe, that's the thing I want, and then just kind of trusting that that's coming across in the font.
That's exactly right. I think typefaces like Comic Sans or Papyrus get a bad rap because they're, someone is saying, I want something that looks handwritten, and they just kind of reuse these industry standards that people, and they start to stand out. But there's so many other handwritten fonts that you can choose from that actually have a character to them or a vibe that you might prefer over Comic Sans. And I get that it's easy to just kind of select something from the drop down, but I think what we're advocating for, at least I am, is to know that type is all around us. It's in the, these magazines. It's on, I got sent a box of snacks from Bangkok from a mutual friend.
From Jesse.
From Jesse, yeah. And it's interesting how like this one, especially, they're actually advertising that this is crispy, or it's called Krusties, but the font that they're using is sort of a rounded sans serif font, which is a little, I would have chosen something different. It's
right?
soft.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe there's something there with the contrast between, crusty and soft that's kind of appealing, and that maybe they were thinking about that way. But it's kind of working against sort of what the vibe of the food is. And so, start deconstructing this stuff, because you don't need to know a lot about type to know how it makes you feel.
Well, Nate, this has been amazing. I highly encourage you to pursue this that's been going in your mind in the last little bit. I think it's fascinating. I think a lot of people could learn from this. So if people wanted to find out more about you, where can they go?
So I do a lot of writing, and I have my, a lot of design stuff on my site, which is Kadlac.com, Kadlac. And then Twitter, which is also my last name, Kadlac. And those are the two places that I tend to frequent.
Awesome. So as Nate said, if you guys have a favorite color, you should probably think about getting a favorite typeface. Nate, thank you so much. I hope to have you back on the show soon. Thank you so much for watching this latest episode of How Did You Learn That? If you enjoyed this one, please like and subscribe below so you can get notified when the next one comes out, and we can try spread to the rest of YouTube. If you want to listen to more of the conversation, the full conversation is on our podcast. So you can find links below and search for How Did You Learn That on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your audio content. If you want to see show notes, links mentioned in the show, and all that good stuff, please check out the description below. I will see you next week.